Good morning, everyone. My name is Ian Morrison. I'm the chair of the Electoral Area Services Committee and represent the electoral area of Cowichan Lake South Scots Falls. I'd like to welcome everybody to our special Electoral Area Services Committee meeting of Wednesday, April 30th. It should be noted this is one of those rare fifth Wednesdays that normally the elected officials count on as not having meetings, but we're all here today. I'd like to recognize that the CVRD is on the unceded territories of the Cowichan, Malahat, Subasat, Halalt, Penelakut, Staminas, Layaxan, Paquachin, DT Dot, and Pachi Dot nations, whose people have walked gently here for thousands of years. Just prior to us getting underway with the approval of the agenda, had some consultation with our board chair, Director Segal, and it looks like we've got segments of presentations being put forward today, and don't know if it's going to generate any resolutions or further discussion. There's a question section in the presentation material, so what we'll likely be doing today is hearing a presentation on a section and posing any questions that we may have, and then we may break for a couple of moments to refresh coffees and see if there will be anything generated out of that section of the presentation. Then we'll go on to the next one. So with that, I turn to Ms. Ferguson. Do we have anything that we are adding to the agenda? Normally it's a one item. Oh, there is something new. Ms. Ferguson.
Yes, Chair, we have two additional pieces of correspondence to be added to your agenda today.
Has the website been updated with that material? The website, and we have the material is available to directors and the public now. And with that, we have, could I have a motion to approve the agenda as circulated? Or yes, it has circulated. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. This brings us to number 2 on the agenda, public input period. And the public input period is to offer the public an opportunity to comment on an agenda item before the committee considers the item. The public input period procedure policy allows for an allotment of 15 minutes, where the speaker is welcome to comment on any items on the agenda up to a maximum of 3 minutes. This excludes items that may, are, or have been the subject of a public hearing. The speaker should comment in a polite, calm, and courteous manner using respectful language, civility, and decorum. And with that, I would like to invite anyone that would like to provide input to the committee this morning to please come forward to the lectern and provide that input. Welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and fellow directors. My name is Susan Kaufman, and I'm from Satlam. I would like to speak to the items on the agenda today, specifically temporary use permits. Those of you that know me know that I'm not a great fan of them because I've had personal experience, and what I have learned is temporary is not temporary. They can be up to 3 years long. They can be renewed once, and following that, the applicant is under the Local Government Act is free to reapply for a temporary use permit again. So this can go on and on and on. And I don't know how there is mention about requiring a rezoning for the use, but I don't know how that comes about if the Local Government Act allows for reapplication. The other part of this is bylaw enforcement. I am in favor of short-term rentals. I think they have a good place in our communities. They help people afford their homes. They service families because families, things are tough. And when you do get an opportunity to travel, I had 3 kids, and I can tell you when they were young, my kids are in their mid-40s now, hotel rooms were a nightmare. And now that we have short-term rentals, you can rent a whole house. And I think they're a good thing, and they're an affordable option for families. I understand where the province is coming from on the returning rentals to long-term markets, but we have an elephant in the room there too, is the residential tenancy branch, which is why a lot of people got out of long-term rentals in the first place. RV living, we're not in a climate where RV living is good year-round. I know I worked in Vancouver for 2 years. My accommodation was in a 17-foot trailer in a legal campground. And I can tell you, winters are brutal. And we get very cold here. We get snow. There's fire risks associated with it because people are using them as alternative heat sources, and they have pets in them. The pets are unsupervised. The heaters get knocked over, and they cause fires. And it's dangerous, and it's not an attractive look. You know, you look around, you'll see lots of them with tarps over them. Finally, bylaw enforcement. I know I'm running out of time, Mr. Chair, but I don't see anybody else speaking. So this is going to be really important in this. No neighbor wants to be the one ratting on their neighbor because they have an illegal Airbnb or an RV rental. This has to come with proactive bylaw enforcement on that piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kaufman. Is there anyone else that would like to provide comment or input to the committee before we launch into a very full, almost used the word fulsome, very full agenda? Seeing none, we have no delegations. We had a couple correspondence items. Any comment, discussion on the correspondence items? We have no information, and that takes us to R1, presentation from the manager, community planning, short-term rental regulations.
Mr. Chair?
Yes?
Sorry, the correspondence came fairly recently, and I'm sure I will have a couple of comments, but can I make those afterwards, or do you want them now?
Well, we're receiving them for information. We're not really considering them at this point. So if you want to make comment at a future meeting, you can certainly do so. Ms. Chirolf, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I just need some assistance, I think, with the podium.
I was just going to ask, are you
Switch there.
loaded up and ready to go? And
There we go.
so, Ms. Chirolf, is that format that I outlined at the beginning work for you, where we do a chunk and take questions and the likes, and then we'll see if there's any desire to bring resolutions out of that? I'm not sure there is, but
I'll provide some guidance on that.
excellent.
So the workshop format that you're seeing here today is what you've requested, coming out of some discussions about the possibility of business licensing. The report is noted in the agenda as coming from the manager of community planning, although it's going to be a presentation from 4 different speakers. I'll do a brief introduction and then turn it over to Mr. Tippett, who will talk about the provincial short-term rental regulatory framework and zoning. Richard Buchan is here, and he's going to talk about proposed temporary use permits. And then Ian McDonald will talk about business licensing and bylaw enforcement. And so we'll have those 4 sort of sections. I guess it's 3 sections. And after each of those, there'll be an opportunity for questions. We've sort of planned for 15 minutes of slides, 15 minutes per questions, if that gives you some guidance on timing. And I will sort of skip to the end of the presentation, which is, talking about what are the next steps, because I think that's probably important right now, in that staff aren't, anticipating that you'll put any resolutions or recommendations forward. Of course, that's your purview, but we do plan to bring follow-up reports on each of the items that we're going to be discussing today so that you can have a fulsome sort of opportunity to review all of the information and have some time to think between now and when those reports come forward about how you want to proceed. Just to give you a little bit of background as well, I went back to, there's a really interesting paper that's available on the UBCM website, and it's called Priorities for Action on Short-Term Rentals, report of the joint UBCM Province Advisory Group on Short-Term Rentals. Looks like this. It's not really terribly exciting to look at, but it's a very interesting read, and it talks about the sort of the origin of the BC short-term rental regulatory framework coming out of the Rental Housing Task Force in 2018. And that was followed by the Joint Advisory Group on Short-Term Rentals, which was a partnership with the province and UBCM and a number of local governments in BC. And that group was tasked with informing the province's consideration of potential policy approaches to short-term rentals, which, as we know, have now included regulatory changes as well. And so it's important to understand that there's context for what's being proposed here, that the sort of impetus for this is long in development.
Mr. Elf, is it possible to get that document distributed to the
Happy to distribute it by
directors?
email,
Some of
absolutely.
us might like to read it
Interesting
start to
context.
finish.
Yeah. And I wanted to note that the thing that was really interesting about this too, and that it's the group was really, thoughtful about what this eventual framework would look like, and they discussed the concerns being, housing availability, housing affordability, land use, conversion of residential properties to commercial, impacts on the public like noise, parking, garbage safety, and disruption. But then they also talked about, the benefits, right, to having short-term rentals, that being, providing interim worker housing, tourism, economic activity. And I think that the goal there was to find a balance. And so when we're thinking about this, we, also want to think about how do we create a system that's balanced and can, meet all of the needs of the community. So there's the kind of brief outline of what we'll talk about today. I'll provide a bit of background. Mike, as I noted, will talk about the provincial short-term regulatory framework and this current CVRD framework and proposed changes through zoning. Mr. Buchan will talk about temporary use permits, and Ian will talk about business licensing and bylaw enforcement. I'm not going to read all of this. You have this in your file, so you can read it. But basically, one of the kind of key points here is that we have a housing challenge. Rental housing is a significant kind of component of the housing stock and needed across the country and in BC. I've made a typo there. CMHC defines a healthy vacancy rate between 3% and 5%. And that's really difficult in the regional district to quantify. The closest sort of proxy that we have is looking at the Duncan, what's called the Duncan Census Metropolitan Area, and it's actually the primary rental market, which is different than a secondary. Secondary rental market would be your secondary suites, detached suites, that type of housing. Primary rental is purpose-built rental housing, multi-unit buildings, et cetera. And so what we're looking at currently is a rental vacancy rate in the primary rental market of about 2.2%. So per the CMHC definition, that's a little low. But as I noted, take this with a grain of salt, because I think about 70% of renters are actually in the secondary market. This is the closest we have. So the board, sort of, following that sort of logic and thought processes around providing healthy supply of rental housing, said we, through the strategic plan, we want to create healthy, livable, and efficiently serviced communities. We want to protect existing affordable housing, and we want to enhance enforcement of and modernize short-term rental regulations. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mr. Tippett.
Welcome, Mr. Tippett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello to the committee. Now, I'll see if yes, page down is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to have a few comments here about what I think the provincial intent was. Ideally, we'd have someone from the province here to explain this, but this is my interpretation of what I think the province is trying to do with their short-term rental framework. I believe the intent is to return short-term rental units that are occurring on properties that were intended for residential use to the long-term housing market. In so doing, they prepared a number of stronger enforcement tools for local governments to assist in that. And the tools I think you're relatively familiar with, things like business licensing for regional districts, for example, and the loss of legal nonconformity for anyone who had been doing short-term rentals in the past, and that sort of tool. There's a new provincial short-term rental regulation and an associated register, which is the fifth bullet here, which is a new process, of course, which is intended to deal with online advertising on large commercial platforms for short-term rentals. And the fourth bullet, which I'm doing out of order, is actually the province considers short-term rental and bed and breakfast to be essentially the same thing. I'm not sure about the individual platforms online. I believe it's VRBO is only renting full houses, like what we call short-term rental, and I think Airbnb does both bed and breakfast and short-term rentals. And so for that reason, I think the province kind of lumped them together. So I'll quickly go to the next slide here. The Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act and regulations are kind of the bare minimum regulations. Local government regulations also apply. This is essentially what the province says, and of course, we being a local government are quite interested in that aspect of it. So more to the point, STRs are only permitted, and by STR in this context, I'm referring to non-bed and breakfasts, right? So like rentals of entire dwelling units. It's only permitted if the zoning allows it. If the zoning allows it, short-term rentals may be permitted in a principal dwelling. And again, if zoning permits it, which is the big kicker, they may be permitted in an accessory building. And if zoning allows it, may be permitted in both principal dwelling and an accessory dwelling. Excuse me. So short-term rentals are kind of limited under the principal residence requirement aspect of the short-term rental legislation to homes where the host, whoever resides there normally, lives for a longer period of time in that building than any other place, which is the idea of a principal residence. So if the principal residence requirement is in effect in an electoral area, in this case, that would mean that a short-term rental would only be legal, whether it's a bed and breakfast or an entire dwelling, if the zoning permits it and it is someone's principal residence. Apparently, and this is something that I only became aware of relatively recently, the way the province looks at short-term rental is the principal residence requirement does not apply if you have two residences on a property, in the sense that you have a single detached dwelling and a suite, whether attached or detached. So the province's perspective on it is, if the principal residence requirement is met in that principal residence, the suite is fair game. This is, again, subject to zoning, so don't get the wrong impression. That means that it's legal under our bylaws, but that's how the province perceives it. So the principal residence requirement automatically applies to communities of 10,000 or more and some smaller adjacent local governments. So, for example, the city of Duncan being 5,000 or thereabouts is subject to the or automatically opted into the principal residence requirement unless they choose to opt out. And I have no idea whether they've opted out or not, but that's kind of the basic rule. And as you know, because you went through this recently as a committee, every year there's a an opportunity for regional district electoral areas to choose to opt into the principal residence requirement. I think coming up in November of this year, for the year to follow it, 4 electoral areas will be opted in. And the final point here is principal residence requirement exemptions include ALR farm class properties, timeshare, fractional ownership properties, home exchanges, student or employee housing, and strata guest suite. So what is a strata guest suite? That is the best example I can think of is Bev Suderman's strata in Duncan here. They have a guest suite that's part of common property that's available for guests of one of the residents in the building to use on a short-term basis. So they're exempt from that regulation. Now, over to the CVRD itself and its short-term rental framework and zoning. Bear in mind in this discussion to come that most of the zoning rules developed for the regional district electoral areas were developed using fairly conventional understandings of what constitutes residential use. So for example, in communities that historically have recreational aspects to them, I think there's an argument to be made that potentially the zoning that was originally developed for those communities and has persisted since then, perhaps is not as responsive to the reality of actual use as it could be. So I am simply describing here the status quo and not future work. You've all probably seen this chart before at APCs and at a previous committee meeting, and I'm not going to go through it again. I think it's a useful tool in terms of understanding the relationship between going from left to right across here, the land use regulations in place through the zoning, the provincial online advertising process and registry associated with it, and the possibility of local government business licensing being determinative as to whether a short-term rental or bed and breakfast is permitted or not. So, and you've probably heard this several times too, but again, we make a distinction, I guess, between short-term rental and bed and breakfast. Short-term rental, under the way our bylaws essentially deal with it right now, considers it rental of an entire household, like a building, with no presence of the owners or usual resident of the building when guests are present, versus bed and breakfast, where there's a requirement in every one of the zoning bylaws where bed and breakfast is permitted, and it's almost all residential zones for the resident of the property to be present and be the one who is hosting people who are attending the property at the time that they usual residents there as well. Short-term rentals, i.e. the entire buildings being rented, they're permitted in 4 zones right now. 3 of the 4 are developed properties already. The 4th one, the CD2 zone in electoral area F, is in the process of being developed, and I'm not sure yet how many parcels in that zone will be eligible for short-term rental, but it's going to be a fair number, I think. So it's not a very common thing. If we look at the number of buildings or structures where this is a permitted use right now, it's probably under 100 at the moment, and it might go slightly over 100 when that Area F property called Pebbles West is developed. And I noted already bed and breakfasts are kind of ubiquitously permitted throughout the regional district and residential zones with an on-site operator. One of the unique features in respect of bed and breakfasts in electoral area D is we do permit the guest rooms to be in an accessory building. That's unique to electoral area D. In other areas, it's only permitted within the principal dwelling. Now, principal residence requirement, I talked in generalities when I was trying to explain the province's approach to this. At the moment, areas A, C, E, F, and G, and H have opted in, and that, when I say at the moment, I mean last year. So this opting in will be in effect until November 1st, at which point areas E and G will opt out, so to speak, and then we'll only have 4 electoral areas that are opted in for the following year. Areas that are opted into the principal residence requirement must comply with CVRD bylaws, and the host must reside on site. They don't necessarily have to be present in the case where they are in those few zones I mentioned on the previous page, but it must be their usual residence. And the final bullet here notes that CVRD farm property or farm class properties aren't subject to PRR, but our zoning may require the owner to reside on site. And in fact, I can say with certainty that the only type of short-term rental permitted on ALR properties is in fact bed and breakfast. And when I say short-term rental, I mean the provincial version of it. So I'll stop there. And I want to ask the committee members if you have any questions about what I've just presented or anything in relation to it. And I'll try my best to answer.
Anyone wanting on the list, press your button, and we've got Director Wilson.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Mike. My usual lament, where to start. Two things that are mentioned there, one of the things you used is if zoning allows it and principal residence. Those are the two which really jump out at me. And this goes to, for instance, as an example, I don't know whether you've seen the letter that came from there. And it seems to me that the lady who wrote there, is that a principal residence that she's talking about there? Have you read that letter that came in?
Yeah, I did. I think it's the one who mentioned they have like an $8,500 a month interest payment on their mortgage. I don't think it's their principal residence. It sounds like they live in Langford and have a, maybe it's a recreational property.
That's the way I read it as well. So in this particular case, that is not considered a principal residence.
Yeah. I mean, in electoral area B is not opted into the principal residence requirement in any case, so I don't think it really applies there. But also, the use isn't permitted at the moment either. Acknowledging what I said earlier, which is, I'm not convinced that our current zoning is as responsive as it should be to the realities of the historical use pattern in these resort areas, right? So I think that's something that we want to take a look at in the future. But that's. The purpose of this meeting today is just talk about the status quo, and we'll have a plan, I guess, for moving forward with that in the future.
And follow up, please, Mr. Chair. And one of the things that you said there, that the phrase historical use and vacation, I think in our particular case, we've got a situation where I think these were probably, the whole regulations were pointed towards the city centres, the big areas where you need this kind of thing. And we're in a different kind of situation altogether there. So I would hope that would be looked at very carefully. And the last point that I need to make, opting out. I've opted in. How do I opt out?
Well, Mr. Chair, the process for that occurred before, I guess it was March 31st. It was, so you'll have to wait another year if you wish to no longer opt in.
And I wish I'd known what I know now, because I think in this particular case I would not have opted in.
Yeah, excuse me, I spoke with Michelle Ma at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, who is their point person for local government liaison on short-term rentals, and she indicated that, it's a hard deadline. Like, if they don't hear from us about a resolution that occurred before the end of March in any given calendar year, that it's too late. You have to wait for the next year. So keep this in mind for probably in March of 2026, because that'll be the appropriate time to put your hand up and say you would like to not opt in.
Yeah, thank you very much. Goodbye. Yeah, thank you.
So I'm just going to ask everyone's indulgence here. We've got a lot of material to cover, and we got just about everybody on the list. So I'm going to ask that you pose a question and seek clarification, and then yield the floor to the next speaker. So, one of us could ask all of the questions that all of us may have. So let's try and stick to that as a format. And Director Abbott, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Tippett. To corollary to Mr. Wilson, Director Wilson's question, if one has opted out as of March 31st, I can't opt in until March 31st, 2026.
Mr. Chair, yes, that's correct. It's just, I'm not sure, I guess there's a practical deadline. When you look at the number of local governments they have to deal with and the individual electoral areas opting in and opting out, and municipalities, I can understand why they have a hard deadline. But yes, the short answer is it'll have to be next year.
Just for clarification, I was a little confused about the water W8 lots. And I was always motivated to not impart a hardship on those property owners. But there are many other houses in Area D that probably should be opting in for the provincial. So I'll do so next fall. Thank you.
Director Markman?
Thank you, Chair. My question's around your interpretation. You had a slide there that talked about interpreting. One of them said return to long-term housing market. So do we have any information about what came out of the long-term market? Because it implies that a person has something that was in the long-term, went to short-term, and now is going back to long-term. Do we have any information on that?
Mr. Chair, we don't specific to our region. We have anecdotal information, but that's not necessarily reliable. I know the chair actually shared some anecdotal information to that effect a while back regarding, I think, Honeymoon Bay, but that was the province's stated intent. Well, the extent to which it's occurred, I'm not sure. What they have said, or what I have seen throughout the news, actually, just generally nationwide and province-wide, it has been reported that the rental market's eased a little bit recently, nationally and provincially. Whether that's attributable to this Bill 35 initiative or Bill 44 and Bill 35 or macroeconomic forces or a combination of all of those, I don't know. So it's really hard to answer that question. But it certainly was the stated intent of the province when they came forward with this initiative.
And I do have some material from, and I'm wanting to say it's SFU, but there has been some analysis done that the stated intent of the province to do exactly what you've said has occurred to a certain extent. So their aims and objectives have been partially met in this, not completely, but partially. So I will distribute that material to committee members to have a look at.
Mr. Chair, could I just add something? Because
Please.
Director Martman asked a question, I know there's a kind of unique property in Electoral Area H called the Inn of the Sea. This is a nuance of the provincial registry, and I mentioned Michelle Ma at the province, who is kind of the liaison who I spoke to the other day. We had one of your constituents who owns a unit in the Inn of the Sea trying to register online for this. Now, the Inn of the Sea is zone C4, tourist commercial, right? So it's zoned in such a way that it's supposed to be operated like a resort or hotel. So I was kind of shocked that he was required to register this on the provincial registry because it's not what we would normally consider to be a residential property, although we acknowledge some people probably are living there, but that's okay, I think, or at least it hasn't been an issue so far. And that's why I called Ms. Ma from the province, and she said, actually, stratified hotels, that have been subdivided into individual strata lots, or in the case of the Inn of the Sea, it has the character of a townhouse development with a bit of an apartment building in there, are subject to Bill 35. And so within that being subject to it, they have one of two streams. They can either apply as a block if it has the physical characteristics of a hotel, like a reception desk, centralized housekeeping, and so forth, for a single license to advertise on these online platforms as a hotel, or in the case of the Inn of the Sea, where they don't have that central reservation desk and the combined housekeeping, and they're all doing it individually. Every individual in the Inn of the Sea has to apply individually on this registry, which is like $600 a pop times however many units there are there. So that's an interesting twist on this program the province has introduced that I wasn't aware of until actually last week. There aren't that many properties in the CVRD that are like that. I think the Inn of the Sea is one example. Another one is the hotel in Cowichan Bay, which is stratified. So that one does have the character of a hotel. So they've probably done the single application for all of the strata owners. But anyway, a bit of trivia. Sorry for taking up time, but I thought you'd find it interesting.
Thank you. Always so much to learn on this topic, Mr. Tippett. First question, just to clarify, the opting in or opting out doesn't seem to me really matter because our bed and breakfast zoning requires a principal resident to live on the property, correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, it's essentially a redundant requirement with respect to bed and breakfast properties. For those few properties that have the zoning that permits short-term and residential, it's a bit more nuanced
Yeah.
then because,
Okay. And then is this the right time to ask questions about the comprehensive zoning bylaw update and how this might, any recommendations we might want to change or?
there's never a wrong time to ask about that, Mr. Chair, but I would say,
Depends on how far the rabbit hole.
well,
down
I'm
the rabbit
going
hole
to try
it
and keep
takes
this
us.
very shallow rabbit hole. Maybe the rabbit's just, eating grass. But we are aware, I acknowledged in the outset in my description of zoning that perhaps the zoning's not quite as nuanced as it ought to be in the case of some of these traditionally recreational communities or that have a significant recreational element. So we're going to take a deeper look at the extent to which we can address that through the CZB project. We may also report back to committee separately at some future date about the possibility of establishing a special work program in respect of that issue, because we don't want to have an issue like that kind of derail the timing for the CZB as a whole. So, but we do want to deal with it. So we haven't quite come to terms with whether it should be a special project yet, or maybe some of it can be integrated into CZB. But yes, we're aware of it and we're going to do our best.
Director Nicholson.
My question was along those lines. So I'm wondering why we don't just move right to modernizing this whole issue, because it is not working for anyone. And so doing this interim step of trying to rejig things seems to me to be wasting time.
Mr. Tippett.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a good point. I would also point out that the reports that are going to seek direction from the committee on these matters that are being discussed today are coming before you on May 21st, I think, at EASC, a regular meeting. So the draft bylaws that were sent out to everyone's APC, which I think is what you're referencing, Director Nicholson, that's the right time to have that discussion. But that is a good question. Like, is it worth doubling down on the status quo, or could it be suspended until the CZB and other measures come into effect? That's a good question.
Okay, before I go to Director Martman, I'm on the list here, and so there's a couple of points that I think are worth making, and that I was on the UBCM executive when the initial talk of this and the housing forums were taking place, and the staff at UBCM had noted that this was really targeted at the municipal and municipal adjacent areas of 10,000 or more. And there really, at least at that time, wasn't much consideration given for the rural areas. And so I think a lot of the regulation was developed in an absence of thought for rural areas. So that brings me to a couple of points in that, as Ms. Trelford explained, that looking at the primary rental market in the sort of the core area, where it wasn't that long ago that Ministry of Family and the likes was sending people to the Couch and Lake area as a primary, or as a, I guess, by definition, a secondary rental market, but where there was affordable housing. So that leads into my observation on whether or not this may be the case or not. But one of the challenges that we're having at the lake, and this is that residential recreation area, is that there are folks that, and it was never intended for them to get caught up in that, they're in a residential, or they're in a recreation area. They rent their property, their whole property out for a week to a family member or someone they've known for a long time. Now that runs afoul of the regulations. So I was curious to note with that long-term tenant add-on to the definitions, is it possible in your understanding that if a person had a property, Meads Creek or Missachi Lake, that sits empty year-round, except for the summer months where they are there for a few weeks themselves and they rent out for a couple of weeks, would they be within the regulations as defined if there was a long-term rental during the off-season? And I ask that because we have such a rental housing shortage that even to have people housed over the foul weather winter months would be an option. So under the regulations, is that an opening that could be explored for people that want to participate in the short-term rental market, have their property sitting empty most of the year, if they were to go to that model where they did actually rent it out for the 6 or 8 months in the winter, would that make them therefore eligible as a short-term renter?
Mr. Chair, it's a really good question. I think for the most part, our current zoning would not allow that to be the case. I mean, basically, the current zoning doesn't have regulations saying you must occupy your dwelling as a dwelling, but it does say you shouldn't rent it out as a commercial enterprise, right? And so in acknowledging the lack of sensitivity, perhaps, that the zoning has evolved in these recreational communities to that scenario, I think that behooves us to really take a closer look at what scenario and whether that scenario is a good example of one that we should accommodate in a future update of zoning regulations. And I would think, that would actually not be unreasonable. If you look at probably Yubo is another community like that, where there's a lot of absentee owners who don't occupy it as a dwelling and maybe don't rent it out, or do, but just go there like for 2 months out of the year. But that's, ironically, if it's empty 10 months of the year and the owners go there for 2 months, that's aligned with the zoning. It's not a zoning violation. It's not a Bill 35 violation. But if they rent it out for 3 days to someone, that's both a zoning and a provincial Bill 35 violation. So, yeah, it's something we need to take a much deeper look at and find something that works better for our communities.
Thank you. Director Martman?
Thanks. I just wanted to follow up on the Inn of the Sea because it's not one of the listed properties. And so should it be, and what kind of complications arise now that we've opted in?
Well, excuse me, yeah, it wasn't added to that list because that list was developed before last week when I knew that the province at least considers it subject to it. So to be clear, that list includes properties that in the CVRD zoning permit both full-time residential use and short-term rental. So in the case of the Inn of the Sea, C4 only permits commercial use, short-term rental being an example of that. So that's why it's not on the list, and it wouldn't be on the list under those criteria anyway. So, and I think of any other hotel or, I don't know, there's a few motels and things like that, or, they're not in the list either, but they could be hypothetically. But anyway, it's not in the list because it doesn't permit residential use. Yet. Maybe it will at some point, who knows.
Director Abbott?
Thank you, Chair. Just clarification on farm status properties or farm class. It also has to have farm status. You can't have lost your status.
Oh boy. Thank you, Ann.
Class means status.
Okay, yeah. Ann was the one who put that bullet in. Thank you for answering. All right, Mr. Chair, if there's nothing else, I can maybe have the next presenter come up.
Well, I think just to follow form, we'll take 5 minutes and we'll start up again see if there's anything anybody wants to generate. Any further questions for Mr. Tippett before we move on to the next? Seeing none, who's up next? Mr. Buchan, welcome.
Thank you. I think we need the slides to load and then we can get into the presentation. Perfect. So just a quick reminder to everyone today. Back in January of 2024, staff brought forward a report detailing the current policy framework for temporary use permits. At the March 27th board meeting, there's direction to undertake amendments to the bylaws and also some referral policies to look at better involvement with the APCs when we're dealing with temporary use, or sorry, short-term rentals. Staff brought forward a review in September of 2024, and following that meeting, undertook external agency referrals as well as engagement with the APCs throughout February and March of this year. There will be a follow-up report in the second meeting, we hope, of next month, just detailing the outcomes of those meetings and next steps forward. As noted, next month we're going to be getting into the full breadth of TUPs. Today is just looking at TUPs as they relate to short-term rentals. Right now, the TUP proposed policy includes a variety of potential temporary uses, including but not limited to workforce housing, commercial uses, industrial uses, etc. There's really just two categories that are relevant to short-term rentals, that being one, short-term rentals, which could be a whole dwelling or a suite, or agritourism accommodation on farmland. In the draft guidelines, short-term rentals can be considered in suites and potentially within a whole dwelling. The policy includes general conditions and guidelines such as ensuring adequate servicing, that being water, sewer, storm drainage, etc. Also, it has specific guidelines for short-term rentals to require additional off-street parking for guests, limits the maximum number of adult occupants to 8, potentially requires security, depending on whether or not the circumstances merit it. There is some general requirements for restoration, which are going to be applicable for some TUPs, but not all. Since temporary use permits for short-term rentals are likely dealing with existing buildings, likely there's to be no restoration required because it's just a building that will go from a short-term rental back into a residential use. The other option is agritourism. So this is dealing with either RVs or CSA buildings that are suitable for a seasonal use. We'd be looking for a maximum of 10 units, which is generally consistent with ALR regulations, although the board can certainly approve less than that, depending on the circumstances of a property. These TUPs would be for seasonal use only, being April to September. That is to avoid the winter months and the challenges that come across with that we've heard earlier today. There's some general requirements for screening, fencing from neighbors, as well as providing a detailed plan of the accommodation site so we understand what exactly is being provided, and detailing any of the land alterations. It's feasible that in some cases there may be no land alterations. Others might have fill being brought in, picnic tables, gazebos, that would all have to be explained, and depending on the extent, that could be something that's subject to restoration or converting into a residential use after the expiry of permits. A quick note here is that the TUPs are not the only regulations that apply. When dealing with farmlands, there's ALC regulations for agritourism accommodation. Parcels must be classified as a farm, so have farm status under the Assessment Act and maintain it. There would have to be bona fide agritourism occurring in conjunction with the agritourism accommodation. That's things like heritage exhibits, field farm tours, harvest festivals, corn mazes, that sort of thing. There can't be any permanent facilities with those agritourism events. Accommodation is to be seasonal or short-term. There's also some guidance that the ALC provides around making sure that these types of sleeping units are not easily converted into residences. That's why RVs are sort of the preferred method there. It's also worth noting that the CVRD and the ALR allow for conventional bed and breakfast, so 4 rooms in a principal residence. That's something that we've heard earlier today is generally allowed in most residential areas. So this wouldn't affect the ability to have B&Bs. B&Bs are just allowed for the most part. I'm here for questions. I've kept the slides pretty brief because I figure there might be more questions on this. And again, today we're just dealing with short-term rentals and agritourism accommodation. There'll be a more in-depth presentation next month.
Thank you, Mr. Buchan. Director Acton.
Thank you. Well, I had like my own little blowout back there. This is so frustrating, this topic over and over again. But my question for this part is, and I have some comments on the previous part, but I'll hold it for later. But my question is for now is, so we're using the word short-term rental, and I instantly think of like 3 days or something, or 5, like little vacation pop-ins. And, I have my opinion, and our community has needs for all of that, but I guess when we use that word short-term rental, I actually think in Area B, anything more than 30 days is considered long-term rental, which just highlights to me that we really need this modernized zoning, because something that's like 31 days should not be considered long-term. So there's a problem right there. And then, so on paper, I could just rent out a short-term rental for 30 days and tell you it's only $300 and rent it to you and tell you can, just leave when you want to leave. So there's just so many nuances of what's happening, like kind of underground, because a lot of accommodations, like people are not going to turn them into long-term, either not going to, or they're not even appropriate.
Director Acton, can I get you
So
to
my
bring this
question is,
around to
can you
temporary use
define-
permits?
When you use the word short-term rental, how many days is that? And then when we're talking long-term rentals, how many days is that?
Thank you. Through the chair, Mike Tippett might have a bit more to add after I'm done speaking, but I believe that the way that we are looking at defining that in the zoning bylaw, as well as the TUP regulations, are short-term rentals are for a period of less than 30 consecutive days. The province does it slightly differently, but I think Mike can get into that if we need to.
Hold that question for your wrap-up, because that's not the segment we're on. We're on temporary use permits right now, and
Well, it applies to temporary use permits.
so he just explained less than 30 days is short-term, anything longer than 30 days is long-term,
Oh, anything, yeah, okay.
right?
Yeah.
Yes, thank
Right.
you.
Okay, good. Does that conclude your question? Director Abbott?
Chair, thank you, Mr. Bucket. We heard from public input today that a TUP is good for 3 years, and then one can apply for up to another 3 years. I've always been of the opinion that that's it, your maximum, but there's an incentive to rezone at that point. And a member of the public has seen instances in her community where people are renewing for more than a total of 6 years. Is it 3 plus 3? Ad nauseum, or is it a firm 6 years?
Mr. Bucket?
So through the chair, the way the Local Government Act is worded is that you can apply for a temporary use permit and renew that once. So the TUP would be good for 3 years, could be renewed for a maximum of 6 combined. What that member of the public was speaking to is that in theory, someone could apply for a new temporary use permit after that date for 3 years, renew it again, and then continue that cycle of just doing temporary use permits. That is why in the draft guidelines we've said that anything over 6 years requires rezoning, full stop. And we would flag it in the staff report to the board and the EAC to say this property has been subject to temporary use permit with extension already. Therefore, staff are recommending rezoning at this time.
And just for clarity, the temporary use permits can be up to 3 years, and this committee or board can recommend, I believe, as short as a 6-month TUP. Is it not the case? So anything up to 3 years, and renewal doesn't necessarily have to be for a full 3 years if a 3-year permit has been issued initially. Looking for nodding around the room. That's my understanding. Okay,
And I can confirm that through the chair.
thank you. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. I have 2 questions. One is about the agritourism temporary use permits. So why don't we just change the zoning on farmland that wants to do agritourism? When we had those meetings with the farm community, it was pretty clear that that's what people wanted. And it's, you know, it's an advantage for us from a tourism perspective to help, and it helps their businesses. So why don't we just get on with fixing that instead of going to all this trouble to develop a temporary use permit for agritourism?
Mr. Bucket?
Through the chair, I believe that the Community Planning Division is working on the modernized zoning bylaw to deal with that sort of item. At present, the only option for agritourism in most circumstances is to rezone. This would just provide a pathway to get to agritourism accommodation. And if this is adopted prior to the new zoning, it provides a pathway that is relatively quick. And if the new zoning replaces it, then we might just take it out of the guidelines if it's no longer necessary. Where it might be valuable to maintain is if the new zoning bylaw, and I'm purely speculating, if the new zoning bylaw speaks to a number of units based on lot sizes, we could still issue TUPs to go beyond that number of units on a trial basis for property. So there's still some value in it.
And just before you get to your second question, that's exactly what you've highlighted is exactly what we might want to contemplate when we complete this question period in this section of the presentation this morning, that if there was a desire to put forward a resolution that the staff prioritize the clarification and zoning on this, that we could do that following the completion of this question period and our break. Your second question, Director Nicholson.
My second question, I think, is probably for Mr. Elf. So temporary permits are an interim measure to respond to the fact that we know we need to modernize our zoning to provide for more opportunities for various kinds of rentals. So if we I'm just wondering about the administrative cost of us doing this kind of interim thing when we maybe should just move to fixing the problem. Because when you do a temporary, that creates a lot of paperwork. If in fact there are lots of people who will need to apply for temporary use permits until we fix the zoning. So I'm just wondering what the balance of pros, cons are here.
Mr. Rolfe.
Just before
Mr. Buchan, before we call in the big guns here, okay.
One quick comment on that about this being a interim measure is there's going to be other aspects of the temporary use permit policies that aren't strictly just short-term rentals, so there are some values still to it. I can get into the specifics, but I think Mr. Elf can speak to the rest of it.
Yes. Mr. Rolfe.
Thank you, Chair. I think Director Nicholson's question is a very good one because it would not make sense to employ a temporary use scheme where it's expected that we're going to get perhaps hundreds of applications for temporary use permits. That would be very difficult to manage. And I think in that case, we have to evaluate, is there a better approach that could be dealt with through zoning regulations and perhaps through business licensing. So I think that the purpose of today is really for you to think about all of the components of what will be the CVRD's framework for short-term rental regulation. There's a lot of different sort of approaches you can take, and that's really going to be up to this board to evaluate the pathways or the combination of tools that you want to employ. To answer the question quickly, yes, you could simply go straight to zoning, or you could take a more conservative approach. It will be your choice.
Thank you, Mr. Rolfe. Director Segal.
Thank you. This is great clarification because I also lean towards, looking at the zoning. But one question for Mr. Buchan. So there was a slide you had that talked about B&B must be contained, up to 4 bedrooms contained within a principal residence. I'm wondering if an attached suite would require a TUP, or does an attached suite fall within that idea of being contained?
Mr. Buchan.
Through the chair, I believe in most of our zoning bylaws, although I'd have to go back and read through them all, it speaks to a bed and breakfast being contained in the principal residence. So not a separate dwelling unit or suite. So generally that would be something that would be dealt with through either modernizing zoning or allowing a TUP for that purpose.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Buchan. fully supportive of what we've heard from the agriculture community around agritourism. I'm looking at this from a little different perspective and wondering if we will be talking about this at a different time, but it's the temporary use permits for RVs and the likes for workforce housing. And, you know, there's a lot of skilled trades that are mobile that use their RVs as temporary residences. And so do you have any comment on that? And I also have a question about, it seems like we're contemplating TUPs and we're contemplating zoning. And is there an either or is it both? Because I'm sensing that having both is giving us the most effective range of tools to be able to deal with not just housing, but other temporary use permit issues as well. So go ahead.
Thank you. And yes, there is going to be a specific section on temporary worker housing as a TUP option. That is part of the overall temporary use permit project, and that'll come forward at the next board meeting in May, I believe the 21st. In terms of zoning versus TUPs, these tools can be designed to be complementary. Zoning is going to give us sort of a broad brush, here's what we expect. Temporary use permits can be designed to have a little bit of flexibility to the boards to consider uses that might be appropriate to try out. One of the examples that I've given to the advisory planning commissions is that not all of our commercial zones allow for a daycare use, and sometimes we get a daycare provider who is beyond the scope of what a residential daycare would be and into the commercial daycare type setting. A temporary use permit could potentially be issued in 4 to 6 months, depending on our process, whereas rezoning can take longer than that. So there's a value in having that tool to allow for someone to temporarily try out a commercial use in a commercial area that otherwise isn't zoned for it. But that is getting into the report that'll be coming forward with the fulsome discussion of referral feedback and advisory planning commission feedback.
Thank you. I have another question, but I'll go to Director Deck next and put myself back on the list.
Thanks so much, and thanks, Chair. Currently in Area I, there are many short-term rentals, and members of our community, of course, are concerned about, you know, the sort of the hollowing out, I've heard people say, of a community when so many short-term rentals exist. So I'm wondering if a number of number of the owners requested a temporary use permit and say it was sort of a swath of them, would that sort of trigger a whole rezoning of an area and sort of lock in short-term rentals for the community that may or may not like it?
So
Mr. Buckham.
through the chair, in theory, owners could come together and apply for a slate of temporary use permits at the same meeting. They could also band together and apply for a slate of rezoning. One of the things that we didn't get into in the slides is that there's been some recent provincial changes to legal nonconforming protections for short-term rentals. One of the main benefits to a temporary use permit when dealing with a use that isn't permitted is that after it's done, there's no legal nonconforming protections that get granted to it. So if we rezoned using that commercial daycare, for example, and that use is established, and then we take that away, it's established, it's allowed to stay until it stops for a certain period of time. The provincial government changed the rules for short-term rentals so that if the local government takes away zoning, it's just not permitted and there's no legal nonconforming protections. So whether or not those individuals go forward as a slate with temporary use permits or with rezoning, if the zoning is removed or if the TUP expires, the use can't continue.
Thank you.
And my final question, Mr. Buchan, has staff begun to contemplate the notion of an allocation or a quota of TUPs for specific sections or segments or uses like short-term rentals? And I just put that forward. I know that it's a new idea that's been generated, but it would be If an electoral area was granted, 30 short-term rental TUPs, and that it was reviewed on an annual basis as to whether or not those 30, if they are fully subscribed, are adhering to community standards, noise controls, parking issues, that sort of thing, then it creates a value and also a responsibility of those TUP holders to ensure that they're abiding by the rules and regulations contained in the TUP. So has there been any exploration of that notion as of yet?
Through the chair, there hasn't been an exploration of a quota system for TUPs. Certainly, the comments about being a responsible permit holder would be valuable for someone who wants to renew a permit, because any negative impacts to the neighbors could potentially be brought up when it comes to renew. If that is the board's direction and wish to look at a quota system, we could certainly take that offline and look at how that might be best addressed. Thank you.
Ms. Terrell.
Thank you, Chair. And just to follow up on this sort of line of inquiry on quota systems, that's something that we would also need to consult with legal counsel about, because there are some legal ramifications to implementing those types of schemes to ensure administrative fairness, et cetera.
Absolutely. Seeing no other questions, it's let's break until 5:02. And Director Nicholson, is there anything that you'd like to pursue around furthering this idea? And we'll break and discuss now. Mr. McDonald, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, directors. So this segment's going to be on a couple things: business licensing and enforcement. Just before I jump into all the slides, so the second section on enforcement will also have elements of what the first section is. So when we talk about business licensing, there'll be a component that will go there. So it's not just going to be just when you see the business licensing section, there'll be keys that'll come into enforcement. Similar to Mr. Buchan, that there has been board resolution. So back in June 26, 2024, there was a resolution that staff preparing a service establishment bylaw to implement business licensing and a regulatory bylaw for short-term rentals and bed and breakfast businesses within the areas. Further to that, in February, at Committee of the Whole, a service establishment bylaw came forward, and it was given direction at that point to have a workshop. So here we are. Just a quick discussion on zoning versus the business regulation. So we have very robust zoning regulations already, but the nice thing about having business regulation is we can further regulate safety, health. You can be very even specific. If we're talking about short-term rentals, you can be talking things like even literally the number of nights of stay. In my research, I had seen some regional districts that had done just that. So as I said, so the service establishment bylaw, it's different from the regulatory bylaw, so it's independent. What we're looking for in the regulatory bylaws is just short-term rentals, and for the bed and breakfast short-term rentals, so not too confused with trying to implement a business licensing scheme at this point throughout the CVRD for other things. So I think there may have been some confusion with the service establishment bylaw when it was being presented that we were looking for more, but it's just even if you were to choose not to do business licensing at this point, it would probably be very advantageous to actually go through with the service establishment bylaw. That way you can park it and at any point bring it back forward without having to go through all the meetings and the time it would take to do that. So the benefits. So there's many benefits from having a business licensing. That includes confirming compliance with zoning and building bylaws. Inspections. This is a real key one at this point. One of the things that happens when a building is signed off, in fact, I'll even go farther, there's probably lots of buildings that wouldn't even be signed off. They could have pre-existed the CVRD's building bylaw. But the examples I'll use is where staff sign off and give an occupancy to a build, and we never go back. So now you could meet the zoning regulation and have a bed and breakfast. And from very few ones we've seen, there are some short-term rentals that are permitted, but I'll focus more on bed and breakfast. So here's an example where just about every house out there is allowed to have a bed and breakfast. But because we haven't gone back and looked, we have no idea if they followed any kind of safety regulations or if anything's been modified. Do they have smoke detectors? Is there proper exiting? Any things like this, like even the windows. Do they have the right windows in the bedrooms? So anyway, for us, that was a key thing. Another thing I came across while doing my research that I found really interesting was a safety plan. So I'm going to talk about it in the next screen, but this one is kind of a key thing as well. I'm also going to talk about the registry, which is on the screen, but I'm going to talk about that later as well. So here is an example on the screen of a fire safety plan. These are, the nice thing is that they would submit it to us at the time of applying for the business license. And while I was looking through, those various places, Kelowna, Rossland, Nanaimo, just what everybody had this. And it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like a hotel. So you're generally going to have people that have never been to your place before. And this might be more prevalent maybe that you would require this in the short-term rental. The bed and breakfast is likely going to have the homeowner's going to be there. But if you're going to rent a whole house and the power goes out or something happens and you don't know, you haven't familiarized yourself with the place, we see that as a potential hazard. So that's why I noticed that some of the things that have been asked for are things like even beyond the building code is actually even like fire extinguishers. So this is when I went back and said, well, we could ask for other things, and that's what we would ask for in our fire safety plan. So I have a preliminary bylaw that's already been written. It's 95% done. It is a defined term in that of what a fire safety plan is, and it really outlines what would be required. And even here in this example, where I've mentioned, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, fire extinguishers, where are the fire exits. Another thing would be if you're renting the whole house, ensuring that there's contact information. So should something go wrong, that you can contact the host. So as I said, they're also tied to, a lot of this is tied to the enforcement. We originally looked at having a question period there, but I felt it better that we put this all together than get all the questions together. So back in July of last year, July 24th, there was a resolution that staff undertake proactive enforcement. Currently, I can say that even though we were given direction that way, we have not been proactive. We've been working at it. We have a plan. One of the things was to see, as there seemed to be a lot of questions coming, also that maybe it would be a good idea to have this workshop prior to taking that proactive enforcement. For that, we currently right now, when we're talking about business licensing and why it's so important to us, that tool, it's very difficult to gather the evidence that we required. So if somebody's trying to prove that a place is a short-term rental, the amount of staff that's required and to try to prove that somebody is actually doing just that and then to ticket it or take further action is very difficult. We can use bonds right now, which has been a great new tool, and the maximum fine there is $500. And again, I've talked about this registry, but I believe that is going to be on this screen. So starting tomorrow, anybody that wants to advertise must be registered on with the provincial registry. We do have access to it, and it is a great tool for us. Some of the information that we're getting is the platform they're advertising on, the number of bedrooms they're using, are they using the whole home or not, the host's address and email. That will be key for something if we have business licensing, because we would be able to mail the owner the ticket should there be an infraction. I've not included in the PowerPoint, I'd like to include one of the issues I do have with the registry. So this screen, although you don't even need to see it, because what it basically was, a screen that I did when I tried to register. I don't have a short-term rental, but I thought, okay, I don't comply with zoning. How easy would that be for me to do? So it does have a disclaimer on there saying that it recognizes that the rental may not be in compliance with local zoning. And that's all it said. And then it said click to continue. So by doing that, you can get through. And I'll go farther to that, is that when I ran it on Monday, I won't give the exact number because it's excessive, it's big, it's in the hundreds. I can't confirm that all of them are not illegal or short-term rentals. Some are legitimate bed and breakfast, but what I did discover on there was 185 of them listed their business license number. So considering we don't have business licensing yet, a lot of people have jumped the gun on us and already got their business license. So well, that's, because we have their addresses, this is something we may look into. So another issue back to business licensing, why it's so important to us. So further researching, once we got access to the registry, we did notice that it seemed to be the ability that we would be able to help or give the province notice and that they would assist in taking the advertisement down. It turns out, of what I've seen so far, this may not be the case. I'm trying to confirm with the province right now. They haven't got back to me, but from what I've read, it certainly looks like they're only interested in actually enforcing where business licenses or regional districts or municipalities who have business licensing. So it's an unfortunate thing for us, but again, just another reason why we feel that this is a key piece, and that's why when I want to talk about business licensing enforcement in the same slides, why we're at that. Spoiler alert, I'll say this is my last slide because what I'm going to talk about here is that the icon you see there should actually be a big $sign. This is the best tool for enforcement, and this would be our primary mechanism for enforcement. What is in the bylaw that's it's just sitting in the wings right now is it would be a ticketable offense to advertise on any platform. And why it says any platform, because even the province is only going after the major players. That doesn't stop somebody from Facebook and or their own websites. And we are aware of some of those that are out there. The cost effectiveness of this would be that somebody could literally sit at a desk and go online and do it from there. And because we have all the information of the owners and their email, we could just mail them a bond right from the desk. So we're not even out in the field. So the proof is really in the advertising. So again, I just like to say that what a great tool this would be for us and how cost effective, and it wouldn't take a lot of extra resources to do this. And in that, I'm here for questions.
Director Wilson. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ian. First question, service establishment bylaw, which you mentioned here. Is there any cost or staff effort involved in that? Cost mainly?
To the Chair, I believe the report that you had back in February covered all those. That was Ms. Boyd that delivered that. I think that might be a more appropriate question for her. Now, I will speak to it a little bit because I think although we didn't get into it, I have a note here that in case somebody did ask some questions about it. I believe she had said, and in fact it was in that resolution, that they had rescinded, or she was recommending to rescind the previous resolution because they wanted to look at doing, to save costs, would be that it could be approved by, the service establishment could be obtained by participating electoral area director written consent. Therefore, you're not doing an AAP. So, okay. So that would say that's where that's why I said unless you choose which way you're going to go there, it's hard to comment on the cost.
Yeah. Okay.
Huge cost savings if you don't go the
right.
approval
Okay.
process.
Good. And I wish to the STR registration. You mentioned use of that as a promotion, which is probably a good thing. Where an owner could say, look, I'm almost Red Seal approved. The CVRD said, I'm great, I can go ahead. I've been this, that, and the other. But would there be any comeback on the CVRD as the registered authority. If me as a customer says, I'm not happy, do I complain to the CVRD? Is there going to be any of that comes out? Or like you could go to VRBO and say, this wasn't up to standard. Is there any comeback on the CVRD? Or would there be, as we have now, registered you and said, yeah, you're good to go?
Mr. McDonald.
Through the chair. So I'm not sure I fully get where you're going, but I'm going to take a stab at it. Because I'm going to say no originally, because we don't do the registering. So that is the homeowner or the host registers their site with the province.
Oh, okay.
So when
Yeah, that's fine.
and just for the clarification, what I did is to see if I was just a person that was not compliant, how hard would it be for me to get on that registry? Was the province actually looking? What I'd like to have seen, and I even suggested to the province that there was a referral that came back. So in lieu, if we didn't have business licensing, could we not just have a referral that came to the CVRD? We would confirm yes or no, it's compliant with our zoning, and it would go back, and that would be a simple fix. But I guess there's time and resources for them to do that and develop that. So,
Director Abbott.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Can you clarify tomorrow, if you have not registered with the province, did you say that it's not necessarily the case that they will punch you off the big platforms?
to the chair, to Mr. Director Abbott, what the intent of that May 1st deadline is that in order to advertise, you must be registered. Doesn't mean you've registered and you're compliant. It just means you registered. And in the case where we don't have business licensing, there's no check and balance. It's just, as I said, I was able to do it and very easily, and they're not checking. But if we did have a business licensing bylaw, then they'd be checking to make sure you actually had a legitimate business license number. And we would be able to verify it. And then there also is a mechanism for us to notify the province and have it taken down if it was an illegitimate business license number.
I just think that there's merit in taking our time, watching how this rolls out at the provincial level.
Yeah.
You had suggested something about having the licensing establishment, service establishment bylaw parked, ready to go.
Yes.
But just to see how it unfolds before we march down the business licensing program.
Yes, and through the chair, I just was trying to get the two bylaws apart so that you can understand that there's no worry if you were to approve that service establishment bylaw, you don't have to worry about the businesses like it. So say you still have you're uncomfortable with going at this point in time, and then fair enough. But what I was just saying that you don't have to worry, you can have the service establishment bylaw and then just wait on the regulatory one. So it's not like if you have your service establishment bylaw, you have to go forward. You don't. You can just have that ready, and then when you're comfortable to do it, then that's already done. And then we can come forward with a fulsome report and discussion and then decide if you would like to go forward at that point. And that, as Mr. Rolfe said, we will be having more reports coming forward.
Thank you.
Director Acton.
Thank you. You know, I haven't met one single person yet who has said, I'm really glad that you guys hired a bylaw officer to go after short-term rentals. I'm really glad that you guys have gone down this route of looking at short-term rentals. Like, not one. Like, there is also a crisis of affordability. And we're talking about spending money. I don't know how much money. I don't know how much of an effect this is gonna have. I don't even know how big the problem is. And we're just like shooting in the dark here. But I do know, or at least understand so far, that if we had our modernized zoning bylaws done, we would be in a better place to understand and to enforce and to get to people who maybe have unsafe rental accommodations or long-term and all of that. So it really feels like we're just making busy work, and like I just can't sit and represent my community and say, yeah, let's just spend that money and let's go in that direction. I really hope, I heard a conversation was gonna happen around like, maybe there's some prioritizing of like the modernized zoning bylaw to help with this. Then I hope we have that discussion and we let the province do what they said they were gonna do and let them see how it's going. They're already kind of retracting what they've been doing. So let's stick to helping our communities, trying to make it like, I know our population is really small, so things end up costing a lot. Like maybe not a lot, 50 grand, say, is not a lot in the grand scheme of things, but when we spread it out over only, quick math, I don't know, what is it, 40,000 people, it starts to add up. So I'm done my rant, and I hope that we start talking about prioritizing what needs to get done that's more efficient and costs less. I feel like the CVRD, I already said this to a manager, it wasn't welcomed, but I think we're taking way too long to do any of this. We've talked about it for a long time, and we need to just start moving forward and help mitigate the problem that we're not even sure how big it is. Thank you.
So isn't this wonderful that we have this federation of 9 electoral areas that can have all those wonderful and varied experiences? Because I can tell you, I just about got a round of applause when we were talking about opting in and short-term rentals in the strata in my community, because we had some serious problems and they have been dealt with, mainly as a result of the provincial legislation and the impact that it's had. And I think a lot of the work that we're doing is having a positive impact. And I just want to note that I appreciate staff coming to us saying that they want to be efficient with their time, they want to ensure that there's safety in the potential short-term rentals that are operating. And, you know, one of the things that's really struck me is in discussions in community and at my strata and just even with chambers of commerce, that the discussion around the fact that residential is residential and tourist accommodation is tourist accommodation, and that's a commercial venture. And the discussion following the provincial bringing in the province bringing in the regulations was there's safety concerns, there are housing concerns, there's long-term rental, and from what we understand, the legislation is having an impact, but there's also the safety in the residences, the reporting of income to CRA. There's a whole bunch of other factors, and one of the things that's becoming clear is there are people that count on this income, and they count on income for short-term rentals to be able to keep their head above water. And if it requires them reporting their income to CRA, if it requires them doing this legitimately, then they're not opposed to business licensing regime if that is a complementary activity to being able to advertise their property. So I'm looking at this as a question of those that are legitimately trying to move forward within the regulatory regime that has been developed, and those that have been trying to, for lack of a better term, make a quick buck and operate a tourist accommodation operation in a residential zone. And that's where the difficulty that we had in our community is there were essentially party houses that were developing in quiet communities that were residentially zoned. So I'm looking for help from staff as to, I think most people in rural areas aren't really interested in more regulation for the sake of regulation. But if it can be proven that we're not going after business licenses so that we can be intrusive, but it's a complementary tool to ensuring peace and stability in quiet neighborhoods, quiet residential neighborhoods, that's what I'd like to hear from staff. So is this really, is going to a business licensing regime a tool that you need to be able to do your work effectively on behalf of our residents?
To you, Mr. Chair, yes, I do believe that. Further to why I ordered the slides the way they were is I wanted to be safety first, enforcement second, and that's why the slides are structured the way they were. And then when I talked about those kind of things, because those are very important things. And when I was looking around the province, that seemed to be the theme around the province. And when I first discovered that and realized that they were making them post these safety plans on the walls, just like a hotel, I was going, like, what a great idea. It was like one of those moments where you go, why didn't I think of that? So I got to admit, that was one of the first things I discovered, going like, this is like one of the big keys to all of this. It's a great enforcement tool, so yeah, that's complementary to our staff. And through to Director Atkin, we think that's very cost effective, and that we don't think we have to hire extra staff, and that we can utilize a tool like this, that we can use the resources that we have right now. So there's all kinds of benefits that way. Another thing I didn't talk about on the benefits, and it was not just on the safety side of things, but it wasn't on enforcement, was we'd also be able to start to track where these all are, because we would now have a list of where all of them are located. It's something we don't know right now. It's interesting that even some things have come up recently where we've had some issues, and I've turned to staff and said, oh, I didn't realize they had a bed and breakfast there, because these aren't typically been advertised in the past, and we don't have a catalog of where these all are. So that's probably more key, because we don't have a lot of places with short-term rentals, but we do for bed and breakfast. So it would be very advantageous for us, especially key that it turns out there are a lot more of them than I thought there were. And to go back to our safety aspect that I said earlier, that these could just show up anywhere. In fact, we've come across some that were almost being utilized either as a short-term rental / bed and breakfast that didn't meet safety requirements. So I think just that alone is, call it the price of admission, I guess. But I do think it's very complementary to what we do.
And just so that it's very clear to everyone, because I know this is a concern, the business licensing regime that we're looking at is specific to short-term rentals and to bed and breakfasts. And for someone operating a consulting business out of a spare bedroom or engaging in a home-based business, we're not requiring registration with a business license for those activities whatsoever.
Through the chair, absolutely. But what I'd like to is the point by that service establishment bylaw is that 10 years from now, you may decide that things change, that there's growth, and you might look at certain kinds of businesses too that maybe you want to regulate beyond the zoning. That's where the advantageous part comes in, where I talked about where we have zoning bylaw and business regulation bylaw. But this bylaw that will come up as the regulatory bylaw will specifically deal with only short-term rentals and bed and breakfast. And that's why you have something like the safety plan is in there as a defined term. So we're allowed to be very specific to that kind of regulation. And then down the road, if you chose, we're seeing an issue with something else, maybe we need to regulate that a little bit better. And at that point you could choose, but that's not on our radar, then that would be up to you as directors to decide.
So just for complete clarity, there's the specificity is around short-term rentals and bed and breakfast. There's no mention whatsoever or no anticipation of one day it opening up to other business regulation. And I'd just like to ask our legislative services staff, I'm not going to put you on the hot seat here, but if the service establishment bylaw can be specific to just those items and not have a back door so that it would look like that we would be having the potential to regulate other businesses at a later date, I'd be much more comfortable with that than having a more general, less prescriptive service establishment bylaw. The other staff are listening.
No, it's okay. I'll speak to it. I believe that is possible, but as I said, there will be more reports coming forward. In fact, the one that was at Committee of the Whole back last February, it was sent back to staff to have this workshop, and then that report will come back. So you will have the opportunity then to express your concerns. I'm hoping I'm trying to alleviate some of those concerns, because like I said, it's kind of just saying that even if you chose now, I mean, it's still up to you. You would always have control to vote on whether, even if staff came up with controlling whatever business, and you could say, no, we don't like that. So I don't think you have to worry. Like I felt, and even in that meeting back in February, there was a lot of fear that, oh, we're opening this up. No, you're not. You still have full control, even if you do allow that to happen.
Excellent. I've got Director Martman to close. And is there another section after this, or are you?
There's a brief closing session.
Okay, great. Director Martman.
So I'm trying to come up with sort of framing this all in my head, and one of the things I'm coming up with sort of, what do we use licenses for? We use it for driving. And so what do we enforce driving around? And so if you drive down area H, speed limit, using your turn signal, all these different things that you know the rules. And are the rules the right rules in place? And I think over time we've established the right rules for the roads. I'm not sure we've established the right rules for short-term rentals and B&Bs in our areas. And so I'm struggling with the concept of let's have a business license for this and enforce when I'm not even sure the rules of the road we've got to there. So there's my analogy. And so how do we take sort of a constructive approach to this so that we get those rules of the road first? So we don't start pulling you over if we're doing 60 when actually 80 was going to be just fine.
Mr. McDonald.
And probably a great wrapping up last question, because that actually puts this workshop completely into perspective. So, as I've said, and I'm going to get into a bit of depth here, we talked about having that service establishment bylaw. So again, you can have that and nothing else happens, but it's a good thing to have. But you're right. So now what you can look at is, and that's why Mr. Tippett spoke and Mr. Buchan spoke. So here's some options, and we've recognized this as well, that you may not be comfortable with the actual regulations. One of the biggest questions I get about enforcement from the public is, how do I legitimize my short-term rental? So we're looking for options, and that's what right now, from our perspective, we just have a rule book, which is the zoning bylaws, and that's what we have to enforce. But as directors, this is what this workshop is about. You got some great information earlier to digest, and you're probably going to have to take some of this away and think about it, and then there'll be some more reports coming forward. And that's what we can sit on the business licensing bylaw till you're comfortable that, yeah, you think that this is the right time to put it in. But that's why I'm trying to disassociate that service establishment bylaw so that it's already there. So when you are comfortable with our, at some point you feel that the business licensing bylaw is ready to go, and you feel with it, then we can implement it. But yeah, I think that was a great closing question.
Thank you for that, Director Martman and Mr. McDonald. Great way to end up. And I gather we have some closing remarks from Ms. Chirolf, and we might entertain some direction to staff afterwards. So, Ms. Chirolf, do you have slides too?
I have a slide.
Slide. Uh-huh. Is it a busy slide?
It's a busy slide.
Excellent.
But more could you expect, right? So I wanted to try to present this information in a graphic way for you so you can think about it. So on the left, there's kind of four pieces to this, right? There's the provincial regulations, that question around principal residence requirement, whether you opt in or not. The CBRD zoning regulations, which sit on top of that. I would think a good way to think about zoning is really the linchpin to this whole thing. Do you want to permit short-term rentals or not? Do you want to sort of maybe make your bed and breakfast regulations a little more flexible? Do you want to be more rigid about requiring the owner to reside on a property if it's a bed and breakfast or a short-term rental? I mean, these are all sort of policy questions that you need to grapple with, and staff need to get direction from this body around what it is you want. Do you want to have, do you want to use TUPs as a kind of a starting point for dipping your toe in the water, or do you want to just go to rezoning? Are there specific areas that need to be maybe rezoned so that multiple properties would have the opportunity to engage in short-term rental without having to go through a TUP process, et cetera. So those are the policy questions. And then on the business regulations question, really kind of three points there just to kind of, add to what Ian already told you, kind of, the safety kind of key thing that concerns you with respect to tourist accommodation. That's how that piece gets reinforced. Do we ensure compliance with zoning and the building code? So zoning will tell you if you can undertake the use or not, but the only way to ensure that it's actually, though we have compliances through the business license. And then, could business licensing be used as a way to incentivize a really healthy tourist accommodation industry in the region, right? Provide for some really healthy competition in the market. And, generally what you see is the cream of the crop is going to rise to the top, right? And then on the enforcement side, do you want to be proactive? Do you want to be reactive? Do you want to kind of pull back on enforcement until we have a system in place that you're all happy with? Or, are there specific things that you want to go after? Is it, the whole home rentals by absentee landlords that are kind of offensive? Do you want to focus on that, right? So there's a lot of things that you can kind of think about. You don't have to obviously make any decisions today, and there will be reports coming back to you, which was the last slide. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Trulf, and I think it's important that we've got staff reports coming forward on multiple components of what we've had today, and I'm looking forward to those. So just general wrap-up questions or comments. I don't know unless Director Nicholson's got something to put forward, if anyone else has any resolution or direction to staff, but I currently have Director Wilson, Acton, and Nicholson on the speakers list, so go to Director Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks to the staff, because this has been a very, very useful and comprehensive report, everybody that's come forward, and it's certainly clarified a lot for me. I think the only thing that I can comment on is on regulation, and I know for a fact that the bylaw officers do actually have a heart, and they try as much as they can to apply the intent of the law as opposed to the letter of the law. So what I would guard against, I think, and hopefully this will continue, is that there will be no big brother stuff. There's not going to say, this is what it says, this is what we're going to do. There has to be latitude, and I'm sure that will continue to be. And that's the only thing I've got. But otherwise, no, good stuff. Thank you very much.
Director Acton.
I'm happy to wait and hear what Director Nicholson has to say.
Well, you've got the floor. Do you have any
Okay.
comments or remarks?
I have a
in
question
regards to
then,
that?
and maybe I could come back with a comment after I hear if there's a resolution coming forward. But I guess, so clearly there's not a one size fits all. South Cowichan, I can say for certain that there's definitely some economic strain happening. We have in both Mill Bay, Cobble Hill, and Shawnigan Lake empty commercial space, some for a really long time, where we didn't have that before. And yeah, it's not going to be all short-term rentals as an issue, but we are heavily touristy recreation area. We are also, a lot of our economy in all three communities comes from private schools, so there's visiting parents constantly with very few places to stay, and big events, regattas just happened, that kind of thing. And so the fact that there's no short-term, fits everyone. I do know when I talk to the community too as well, around the lake, well, and I do know a lot of people on the lake as well, but there's a lot of structures that are just cabins. So, and people like to rent them out, or families use them. I think that was mentioned before. And a lot are not even winterized. And then there's even people in the community who like to be able to rent those places just for like 5 days because they remember they used to have a cabin. That is often talked about too. They used to spend time there. I know actually even Jesse had his honeymoon on Shawnigan Lake. So there's always a story coming forward about someone's time on Shawnigan Lake. And so as we continue down this road, those options are becoming less and less. So I guess I feel like there's a little bit of an urgency for our community's sake when we only have a handful of small businesses and we see some come and go a lot. I don't want our small businesses to suffer this summer So my question is there a way to just do a perimeter around Shawnigan Lake, some kind of like lessening of the rules or bylaws or zoning, so that we could at least have, or even just understanding that we will accept short-term rentals that are clearly, vacation, recreation, and not long-term options for people.
Mr. McDonald, I think it's a selective non-enforcement question.
Yes. I just brought it with me because this is the resolution from July 24th, 2024. So it's that staff undertake proactive enforcement. So it is broad, unless you come up with rescind that resolution and come up with a new one. That's the direction that we have been given by the board.
Right, and this is kind of like an amendment to that, and I have been really clear that that doesn't fit our community, and that, so, I'm looking for an exception or something, and you just said that there was no actually active enforcement happening, but the community would still most people don't want to break the rules. But they have this asset, and some are losing money, and they're waiting to see what happens, but the residual effect, like I've said, is hurting some of our businesses and just overall feel and joy of our community. So that's my question though. Can we, or how do we go about doing that? We need
Mr. McDonald.
Yes.
a resolution that says this area is exempt, or we're gonna be a little less strict on recreational areas, or what can we do?
Yeah, no, through the chair, and where I'm going to go with this is that, so you've given us already clear direction that came from the board. So the board is going to have to, as itself, decide to give us that direction or change our course. So right now, you would have to choose amongst yourselves. So I was there when the vote happened. I understood that you were not happy how the majority voted. So I think that you have to come back through your process and have a majority come up with a new resolution for us. So we did back away from the proactive enforcement because we had a plan. I didn't speak about the plan in my discussion earlier, but we did have an educational piece. It also dealt with the business licensing, but there was timeframes because as we knew we were getting closer to the summer, it was unfortunate we couldn't get this workshop sooner, but that's just the way time goes. And we thought we would give the benefit to everybody and wait till we had this work. We knew there was some unsurety with the board, and then as directors, we were talking amongst ourselves as staff that there was definitely confusion over opting in, opting out, all these different nuances of all this. So before even though now we've actually gotten the tool from the province, which that was supposed to have happened quite a while ago, and only we just got access to it, I think I got it last Friday, which the province had promised by almost like the end of the year of last year, so it's months behind already too. So we've just been backing ourselves up, waiting, and although we still have the direction to do it, you talked about an extra officer, we did not in the interim hire that extra officer, so we did not incur the costs. So right now we're just on a sort of a wait and see to see what you choose out of this workshop and the directions you start to take from here. So we're a little bit of a wait and see because we want to have clear direction going forward. But to further directly back to your question, that will be probably for as directors to decide how you want to move forward on that.
So what I'm going to suggest is that Ms. Chirolf has said that we have staff reports coming forward, and that I think we should be making decisions and if we're going to change direction on the basis of information before us. So can I ask if...
Follow-up is kind of important.
Well, just let me finish talking here. So are we having more information coming forward around this specific topic, or are we going to have to look at a separate resolution for contemplating selective non-enforcement of regulation?
We have pretty clear direction right now, so I would suggest if you want to vary from that clear direction, and so your expectations aren't different from ours, we wouldn't want to be doing something that you thought, oh, I thought you were going to do something different. So for us, for clarity, that's what we need. We need to know what your expectation is from our staff.
So my question is there something coming forward on this topic in the future staff reports that are coming in the next couple of weeks? Okay, thank you.
Not sure about 2
Yeah,
weeks, but... The bylaw enforcement policy would be one. I'm not sure if we have that. It's not on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you. So would it be appropriate today, though, to just at least have a resolution that staff incorporate at least something for some special areas, or like, not special, but circumstances? Could we have that today so that then we can move quicker when that report comes
Do you
forward?
want
Ms. Miles Wilson. Oh.
Thank you. Just trying to offer something to the table in that, as Mr. McDonald mentioned, we do have very clear direction from the board to do proactive enforcement. At this point in time, there's very few properties where STRs are allowable under the current zoning. We're hearing the caution and the interest to kind of provide direction on the reports that are coming in a few weeks' time. But if we're looking at this holistically, if you wanted to pause the proactive enforcement, it would be worthy of providing that direction, but not necessarily looking at it from an electoral area specific. But if you want to put past a compliance into place before you do proactive enforcement, I think you should consider that direction. The other thing too is leading up into the busy season, it would be helpful to provide clear direction to the public, as this issue is very complex and has proven to be quite confusing. And we're doing our best to provide that clarification. But yeah, I think good, clear, consistent messaging would be recommended.
Thank you.
So, can you come back to me after Director Nicholson?
I can put you back on the list if you kill your mic and then hit it again. Then you'll be on the list. Director Nicholson. Oh, hang on, something just happened. Director Nicholson.
Thank you. So my comments are very similar to Director Acton's. Ms. Charles said that zoning is the linchpin, and I think that really is why we're in this mess. We have not modernized our zoning for a long time, and we really need to get on with that. And it is clear that there is not one size fits all our various communities, so we need to be careful and get it right. And I wanted to make a motion to indicate to staff that I really think this is an urgent thing that we need to get on with. But given that it's already May, the season is happening, it's kind of a, it's not really practical at this point to fix all this for this year. But so that said, I am very in support of a motion to pause proactive enforcement until we get this all clarified. I'm also very cautious about the licensing. We want to get that right. We should hold off on licensing to better understand what's going on with the province, how that is rolling out their registry thing, and to make sure that we've got the rules right, as the director beside me talked about driving. So, those two things I think we should just pause right now. And I would look for if this is coming back in this month, no, we're still April. So in May, if we're getting a report and we're going to talk about this again, it's really important for me, this is about timeline. So I need to understand very clearly, first of all, is there anything that we can fix quickly? And I would bet you could fix agritourism for the farm, for the properties that are zoned agriculture. I bet you could fix that relatively easily, very quickly. And that would be very much appreciated by the farming community, I am sure. But that said, then there's the question from my perspective is, if we wait for the comprehensive zoning bylaw, how long is that going to actually take? Or should we be putting more attention on fixing the existing zoning that we have? And it seems to me that the more that we focus on fixing the existing, the farther off we'll get to getting the comprehensive zoning bylaw done, which I think needs to be done for a lot of reasons. Really, it's really important. So that's my preferred option, but I feel that this is a very elusive target at this point. So yeah, I'm looking for a report that tells me those things, like what the trade-offs are and if there's any quick options. And so, yeah, I can move that other thing to pause proactive enforcement if you want.
Why don't we get the answer to your question first, okay?
It's not a question. It's what I'm hoping will happen.
It sounded like a question. Ms. Churl, go ahead.
Yeah, through the chair. So I just have a comment, and that is and for next week's Electoral Area Services Committee, there is actually going to be a report on the comprehensive zoning bylaw requesting endorsement of an updated project charter. So that's an opportunity to look at how that project is rolling out and whether there are elements of it that you want to advance more quickly than others. In addition to that, staff could be prepared to respond to the comments about advancing specific zoning regulations around short-term rentals next week. We'll put some thought to how that could be done and respond to that next week, and that can include the agritourism accommodation question.
So to follow up?
Sure.
So I really appreciate that. We haven't had an option to advance particular things more quickly in the comprehensive zoning bylaw. It's been all or nothing to date. So I would really appreciate some information on that. Thank you.
And just to sort of enhance that, I think there's a real important question here for us. Like from a governance perspective, we want to advance key specific items, but in the advancement of key specific items, we may delay the overall package. And I think we need some idea as to timeline. And I would much rather be making resolutions to the board based on reports before us as opposed to sort of on the fly at this point. So you say we're having a report on the charter for the CZB next week, and we have other reports coming forward during the month. So, okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Director Deck.
Thank you. I'm feeling very uncertain about the consequences of choosing one area to sort of be extra gentle with in terms of proactive bylaw officers or, proactive bylaw enforcement to address unpermitted short-term rentals. And because I think many areas in the CVRD could have the very same reasons that members of Shawnigan Lake communities would have as well. But also I'm thinking of those others of us who, in Area I, for example, who are extremely concerned still about short-term rentals, making our communities not complete, and never knowing whether the person that's in the house next to you is, going to have a party or whatever. So I'm in favor of continuing with the decision that we made that resulted in the hiring of someone to do this. So that's where I stand. I sure don't want us to go down some slippery slope that may begin by non-enforcement in a certain area of the CVRD. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Deck. And I've just so you know, I've got, I think, Ms. Miles Wilson, and then Director Martman is a first-time speaker, then back to Director Acton. Ms. Miles Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. I just wanted to offer something in response to Director Deck's concern. So in the consideration of whether we proceed with proactive enforcement or not, that's not to say that we wouldn't still do bylaw enforcement on a complaint-driven basis. There's still a lot of short-term rentals that are not legal in the CVRD currently. It would simply be that we're not going to be actively and proactively seeking them out, but when complaints do come in, we'd be obligated to respond.
Thank you. Director Martman.
Thank you, and I look forward to next week's discussion about the comprehensive zoning bylaw. I guess my takeaway from today is the lack of information that is out there on the secondary rental market. Like, really, what is it that we're trying to accomplish here? Because we don't know, what is the vacancy rate for a secondary market. The other thing that we don't know, at least in my area, is how many of these places that people are offering for people to stay, whether it's short-term rental or bed and breakfasts, were actually ever long-term. The idea of returning them to the long-term market, well, they never were long-term. I don't have any information on that. And so what I do know, though, is the affordability is huge out there. Like, people are struggling to find ways to pay their mortgages. And I can just highlight 3-stream curbside collection in my area about just having a $7 voucher. So here we're talking about, what I consider to be a small business. And so I'm looking for ways for us to consider how do we improve the bed and breakfast or make it more flexible for property owners. Do we want to consider perhaps what Area D is doing? Because I think that we need to consider that aspect, certainly in my area. And so I'll be looking forward next week maybe about talking about more flexibility around bed and breakfasts. So.
Thank you. Director Acton.
Thank you. Yes, I think some flexibility in some of the zoning would be great. One point that I failed to mention before too is a lot of short-term rentals already have a database of people they rent to. So this is an opportunity, like, we're missing out on the hotel tax, help me out here. Anyway, MRDT. So there's a lot of lost revenue there too. And so, but I do have a resolution from staff, and we haven't actually started proactive enforcement yet, we heard. So that we would continue, it's essentially that we would continue to do that. This is the resolution anyway, that staff pause proactive enforcement of short-term rentals until staff can report back on feasibility.
You're moving that?
Yes.
There's a seconder. Do we have any discussion? Director Deck.
I'm just wondering then if that would mean.
Hang on. Something's going on here. Go ahead.
So I'm just wondering if that the employee that was hired to do proactive enforcement would not be needed anymore, or?
There wasn't a staff person hired for that specific position.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. McDonald.
Yes, to the chair and to Director Deck. We looked to fulfill the position, which in essence we did, but we filled it internally. But we didn't backfill the internal person, but because it's a regular part of that person's job, technically we still have a bylaw enforcement officer that's still doing bylaw enforcement, which we would have had anyway. We just weren't able to fill the backfill. So we still have the same complement of officers we've had for some time now.
So I'll make one remark, and that is I'm concerned about signaling, and this has been something that we've contemplated from the very beginning of this. And I think staff have done a great job in staffing and their approach to this, and I think are responding on a complaint basis. They haven't been, it's been quiet on that front, more or less, and I'm concerned about the signaling of a resolution like this going to the board in a week's time, opening up the impression that those that aren't operating within a regulatory regime can continue to. And that's a real serious issue in my concern. So seeing Director Martman.
I remember us making this decision probably about a year ago now. And this is where one of those things where, I agree with the chair about, what are we signaling? But at the same time, we made this decision a year ago with information a year ago. And so I'm finding it very hard to continue on a decision when information changes. We have to be able to be flexible. And I think that that's the message that has to come out from this. Isn't about saying, hey, we've changed our mind. What we've done is the information has changed over the last year, and therefore we are leading ourselves to saying we aren't moving forward with this. Well, honestly, we never moved forward with this because it didn't happen. So I do understand that, but I think the message has to come out clearly then that it isn't that we are pausing, it didn't start, and the information has changed in the last year. I'm really interested to see what the provincial registry comes out with and what they will do over the next 6 months. So I think I would vote in favor of this things.
Director Abbott.
Chair, could we have the motion read again, please?
Ms. Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair. The motion is that staff pause proactive enforcement of STRs until staff can report back on feasibility.
Thought I saw Mr. McDonald. No. Okay. No further speakers. Call the question. All in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries. That'll go to which board? In 2 weeks' time? So is there any other business to be conducted at this point? We have staff reports coming forward. Ms. Trelf, that concludes all the reporting to be done. You have a question. Go ahead.
Well, a point of order of the resolution, is it more, would it be better for staff for it to go today? Would it go today?
No, it can't
Oh,
go
can't,
today.
can't, okay. Never mind. Thank you.
Ms. Ferguson, does that bring us to section 9 on our agenda? Question period?
Yes.
Question period is an opportunity to offer the public to ask a question regarding the business of the CVRD. The question period allows for an allotment of 15 minutes and is comprised of 2 parts. The first is reserved for questions directly related to our one agenda item today. If there's time remaining, questions may be on a matter of public interest related to and in the CVRD's jurisdiction. Each questioner is permitted to ask 1 question plus a follow-up question related to the answer. The question must truly be a question and not a statement of opinion or speech. Questioners must avoid personal references, insinuations, violent, offensive, or disrespectful remarks about another person, and unparliamentary language, and I would welcome anyone that would like to provide or ask a question of the chair to please come forward now to do so. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to say, as a member of one of the Electoral Area Advisory Planning Commission meetings, coming here today was very informative because we did not realize that business licensing, when this was referred to us, was strictly for short-term rentals and Airbnbs. So, my question about pausing proactive, I think what I heard today from your staff was that the business licensing and bylaw enforcement was safety-based, and I'm wondering how you can pause on safety.
I'm pausing to think about this because I don't think it is the intention of the committee or staff to pause on safety. I think that the question of proactive versus our regular enforcement approach is we go looking as opposed to complaint-based. And staff have been not actively driving around looking for infractions, but have been doing some desktop work and searches on the internet and the likes. And I don't know that this resolution is intended to for that to discontinue, and I think that staff will continue to ensure that safety is the number one priority. It's some of the other components of bylaw enforcement and the short-term rental question that is for us to grapple with. Clearly, we've got provincial regulation that is dictated certain things happen. We only really have anecdotal information as to the effectiveness and success of the provincial regulation. And as you've heard here, we have varying perspectives from electoral area to electoral area. So we are, I think staff are considering safety first, and I do believe my colleagues are as well. It's just the degree and the activities of the staff that are being paused.
Okay.
It was a tough question.
Yeah, it is. And it's a tough question for those people that, both, and like I said earlier at public input, I am in support of short-term rentals because I think they do fill a need within our community, and they a healthy economic contribution to our communities. But there is also an impact, and the need for regulation and safety is very important. So that's what I'm trying to put forward, and I'm hoping that has been, the board understands that that's where it's coming from.
I think we do. I do. I know that there is a dramatic lack of accommodation available in the Cowichan Valley. We can't host events here because of that dramatic shortage. We also have people who can't afford a long-term rental. And we have had good accommodation providers operating under the bed and breakfast regulations. And we've had people that have been making cash grabs in the short-term rental business, flying below the radar, not reporting income, providing questionable accommodation, and it's those that we would, if we were targeting on a proactive basis, would be looking at. So we hear you, and thank you for asking the questions. They're tough questions, and they're what we will all be dealing with in the next, I'd say, month ahead as we consider all of these items.
Thank you for that. When it comes to RV rentals, whereas being used for long-term accommodations, there's many of them out there. You go down the road, you go on social media. I understand that these regulations are, and the temporary use for them is to address future people applying. What is the CVRD doing to address the ones that are already existing?
I'll have to consult with staff, and I just want to make sure I understand, I'm clear on your question. The temporary use permit, from my understanding, is not a response to legitimize RVs as a long-term use. I thought it was presented in the context of like a farm labor or tourist accommodation on agriculture zone properties. So I'm getting a nod from staff. So as to the current non-permitted use of RVs in backyards and alleyways, I'm relying on that amazing discretion of our staff to enforce where necessary and where complaints have been made.
Okay. And how will that address the sewage and water?
It's a great question, and I know that most septic systems in the rural areas are not equipped to have additional lines run into them.
That's my point. Thank you, sir.
I gathered that. Thank you very much. Anyone else like to ask a question? Please come forward. Welcome. Yes, you do.
I think my question is,
What's your name and where are you from?
my name is Stacy and I'm from Area B.
Welcome.
My question is kind of about clarity because it seems slightly confusing that short-term rentals that are to apply for the provincial registration, it sounds like they're not in compliance with the bylaws, but you're pausing on the proactive enforcement of them. So, which kind of seems to put homeowners and people in a strange position to kind of be encouraged to be in that gray area of breaking the rules while the modernization is happening. So I guess my question is about timeline of what is the projected timeline to kind of solve this for this problem that homeowners are facing, to be in a position where it's kind of being pushed to break the rules, it seems.
So we don't ever encourage anyone to break the rules. I'm hoping that after you leave here, you can contact one of our staff and get some clarity as to the regulations in your area, what your zoning is and the likes. I can tell you that short-term rentals, not bed and breakfast, but short-term rentals are prohibited in most of the CVRD except for, I think they mentioned 100 lots. There's evolving rules that we'll be contemplating in the next month. We want to ensure that people that are reliant are properly zoned to be able to operate. We want to ensure that people are offering safe accommodations. We want to ensure that people are operating this within the bylaws. And if there is a question as to whether or not you're on the right side of the bylaws or in a gray area, it's staff that will help you with that. And I can tell you that I've had a number of meetings with individual residents in my area that thought they were offside and really weren't, because they could operate easily within the bed and breakfast regulations. So whether, we don't want to get into whether it's an attached or not detached and whether you have a Keurig in the basement or whatever at this point, but staff will be more than willing to assist you with this.
So I think just the general question would be, what is the timeline for the modernization of the zoning bylaws?
We are getting a staff report next week that's going to be a project charter that includes timelines, correct, Ms. Terrell? So we will know next week as to the anticipated completion and rollout of that. So I can't give you the answer today, but we'll all know that much next week. Okay? Is that anything else?
So much more, but
Well,
it's-
are we out of time?
I do have to run.
Go ahead, fire away.
No, yeah, just many more questions on the clarity. One other question was, what is the number of historic complaints for short-term rentals in the area? Like, is that, it seems like that's some money that's gonna be spent on enforcement, and what is the actual?
Staff could probably help you with that. Yep. Great. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I think that takes us to what? Motion to adjourn? We have a motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? We're done. Thank you, everyone. Do we have some lunch?